Hi there, this is Carl Irwin, and this is a quick talk about gear. I think anybody that ever does a music composition YouTube channel has to talk about gear. You got to do one video about that. And most people, every time they upgrade something or get something new, they will do another video. And most of those videos end up being really product placement. They're sort of advertisements for various brands or types of gear or setups or the current studio format workflow advocacy for particular kinds of industry standards or what have you. This is entirely not that kind of a video because, as you know from the channel, as I'm a Linux user, I use an open source platform and open source software, and I've been demonstrating over the course of a number of videos, sharing on here, what we use in open source software to accomplish the same kind of quality as any kind of proprietary setup. And the one thing you'll note is that the software that we use in Linux is usually very low system resource heavy. It does not use a lot of system resources. You can really have lower powered hardware and accomplish a lot more. It's kind of a thing about the Linux operating system in general, but it also ports well into the software that we run on Linux. Generally, we use things that don't use a lot of system resources. For sound libraries, we use SFZ libraries and SFZ players. It's a lot simpler, more direct than using a lot of the proprietary kind of play engines that are out there and sound libraries. With, of course, the addition of MuseScore 4 and their play engine, you can get a much higher quality very quickly and efficiently with very few system resources. But there is there's some that you have to have. You got to have some power when doing AV, and mostly for visual stuff, but certainly even audio creation. So this just quickly is a picture of my setup that I have, and it's not much really. I have one all-in-one machine right here. This is the current machine that I run on. I got this not too long ago, and I'll show you the hardware in a minute. And I'm running two screens. I have a television monitor up here. This is for video playback for film scoring. It's pretty much all I use it for. So this is an animatic for film I'm working on right now at the very early stages. So just animatic, and I'm syncing. And then I have a side monitor that I use for mixing windows or routing windows. I'll plop into that, and then I'll use the main DAW or the composing software, notation software on the main screen here. It is a touch screen. Again, I'll talk about that in a minute, but I never use it for that. I have over here a whole other machine. This is actually a completely different. There's a tower down here, and I have this set up really for synth stuff. I can do some composing and mixing on this. It's an older machine that I used as my main machine until recently when I got the new one. But I have it set up over here, and I can use for synthesizers, and then I can render things out here and then throw them onto my server and then import them into my main workstation. It's just kind of a side element. Another trick that I found is that when working with synthesizers, you can really get that analog sound if I record to mic. So record from audio output to mic, and it really creates that analog sort of sound without having to do routing, just adding an open space area and then recording that live. So I've done that a few times if I want to get very vintage kind of sounding stuff using soft synths, but then running them through a speaker system and then recording. For recording, I have a Blue Snowball. I'll talk about that in a moment. Obviously, I have an inkjet printer there for scanning, printing, which I hardly ever need to do, but it is sitting there. For MIDI hardware, we'll look at this in a moment. I've got a couple of keyboards. I'm not a big keyboard player. I don't do a lot of entry directly into DAW. I usually import from notation when I'm doing MIDI work inside of DAW. I'll take the MIDI output from my notation software and import that. But occasionally I will use some of the MIDI controls to record velocity or mod wheel automation that kind of stuff. And very rarely I'll input some notes. So I just got a small keyboard here, and I usually use this, or I use an Oxygen keyboard. I'll hook up to that. And then I've got another keyboard over here, just a 64 key keyboard, 64, 66, can't remember the number is on this one, that I can use to plunk some stuff in, usually for synthesizer sounds. So that's my keyboard setup. Let's go through the components real quick, and just so you can see this more in the open, I have another picture here. So I got the lights turned up here and the monitors turned off. You can see, so I've got I think it's a 30-inch television up here, 1080p, 24-inch monitor, touchscreen, secondary monitor, and then another monitor over here for the second machine. For playback, for monitor speakers, these are old Magnavox stereo speakers. I don't have anything special, and it's just running through a stereo system. There's a small subwoofer on the system that's down underneath the table, and I have that wired up. Honestly, I hardly ever use it. I usually use headphones whenever I'm working. It just gives me better sound. I do generally have a dehumidifier running in this room and another place in the room, and this is kind of a basement den area. So I just use headphones most of the time. Sometimes I'll pull the headphones off and listen to it outside on this playback system. My philosophy on that, real quick at the beginning, is that you can spend a lot for monitors to get the absolute best sound, but in reality, nobody's going to be listening to your material in that kind of a setup. So while it is highly valuable to have a nice playback monitor set, I'm not sure it's terribly necessary. You just need to have an adequate real-world playback system, which is going to be like a good stereo system. So these are older Magnavox. They're hooked up to, I don't even know what the brand is of the actual stereo playback. But that's what I use. I usually use headphones. I have not found a need to do anything better. Now, why did I pick the hardware I did? Well, actually at work, I'm an educator at work. Our school computers are this brand. It's just HP business computer. And I load Linux on my work computers, and I have two of them. I've got my office one, which has all the software that I use personally, but then I have also a recording studio, which is based on Linux, and I found that the operating system and all the software worked very well on this machine. So I myself got one for myself at home, and I replaced my older tower. So let's look at the hardware real quick and see what I have going on here. So for hardware, this is what I'm using. It's an older machine, HP Elite One 800. It's a business machine. It has an i7 processor. I have 16 gigs of RAM on it, and it's more than sufficient for what I need. Before that, I was using a ThinkStation tower, and ThinkStation towers are actually built for usually for visual CAD. And that's actually what it was used for. It came from an engineering firm that was switching out the machines, and rather than sending their machines off to recycling, I got a couple of them, and just free. Just gave them to me. I had an in at that place, someone that worked there, and got it for me. And I used that for a long time for AV. And I found that the processors were slowing down, hardware was starting to show some age, so I upgraded. But anyway, that was what I used for a long time, was just an older ThinkStation. And similar kind of specs. I'm not sure about the processor. I think it was an 8-core processor. The i7 is a 4-core processor, but it certainly is a faster bus speed. It had, I don't remember what the RAM was. I think it might have had 16 gigs of RAM, and I traded for 16 gigs of RAM. But again, it's more than sufficient for the Linux operating system that I'm using. So this is my older machine. This is the one I'm currently running now. It has a touchscreen, but I never use it. I just don't use that. I also have a laptop. I have a Dell Inspiron 15-inch laptop, an i5. So, and that, I'll be honest with you, most of the work I do is on the laptop. I do most of the composing and rendering on the laptop. only for film work do I bring projects into the workstation, but I do a lot of composing on the go, on the run, on my laptop. And I'll only do syncing to picture. And even then, I do a lot on the laptop there too. But just for ease of procedure, I'll do the film score stuff on the big rig. You can see the price point here. We're talking, $500. These are home computing machines, this laptop that I'm using. For the other stuff, obviously the ThinkStation was secondhand and was older hardware. And then the Elite One, I bought used. I bought it refurbished. So I actually went to the Amazon refurbished store. And I think that's what you do. When you do refurbished, and I do recommend it, go to a reputable store that has customer service. So like Amazon, use their store rather than some third-party vendor that's on Amazon or some other place. That way, if you have a problem with the hardware, you can ship it back easily. They'll replace it or give you a credit or whatever you need to do. But I've not had problems with that. So other than dealing with Linux, now one of the reasons why I went with this is that my work computers loaded Linux so easily. And then I got a slightly older model for $500, and the machine costs probably $1,000 to $2,000 as a business machine new, and I'm making out like a bandit on that price there, but I've got a solid processor, brand new RAM, and a brand new hard drive, solid state. All of these machines are solid state. I think that's necessary now for AV, is you need to have solid state drives. I made out like a bandit on the price for $500. And then I found that I had all kinds of driver issues trying to load Linux onto it. But I've never found a problem in Linux that I couldn't solve eventually. So it took me about 3 to 4 days to finally hit the right post in the right forum that dealt with my issue. I was able to resolve it, and everything works great. And I'm able to use all the screens that I need, all the ports, all the peripherals that I have. Everything works fine. So that's the game you play with Linux and open source. Is sometimes you run into trouble that you have to sort out, but there's a big community that will help you do it. Input. I have an audio input device, MIDI interface, but I don't use it. I just use the ports on the machine. I find that that's more than sufficient for audio out. And then I use a USB microphone. So I just kind of bypass the issue. Just use USB microphones. This is an old standard. For $50, $60, you can get a Blue Snowball, and now Logitech. And these are great microphones. They really are. I don't think you really need anything more than that to get high fidelity recording if and when you need to do it. And I don't need to do it very often. So I don't even use it for the YouTube videos. Usually I just use onboard microphones or headset microphones for that. But anyway, Blue Snowball, I find that this is great for everything, for voice, for instrumentation. It's got 3 different presets for different types of input. MIDI devices. I use MIDI Plus. This is the Amazon store for MIDI Plus. They're very inexpensive. I don't see the point in spending a lot for MIDI input devices. I really don't. They're simple. They're simple machines. They're not complicated. There's really nothing in fidelity that you need to worry about. They're MIDI data controllers. So I say go cheap and just read the reviews, make sure that the thing's going to work for a while, and don't spend an arm and a leg on MIDI input devices. But my MIDI input devices are mostly MIDI Plus. That's what I get. And I've not had to replace anything I've had for years. Several keyboards and MIDI input devices. So MIDI Plus is what I do. There's no need to break the bank on certain peripherals. Just not any reason to do that. And then for headphones, I go with Gemini. Low budget, very low budget. $40 for monitoring headphones. They're not open back. They're closed. I have a noisy room anyway with the space down there. The furnace is just a couple rooms away. I've got a dehumidifier running. Sometimes I'll turn it off if I really need to hear well or if I'm recording. But I find that just closed back, low end, good monitoring headphones is more than sufficient. And I'll use these on my laptop as well. So I have kind of a unity of sound between my different locations. So That's pretty much it. That's what I use, and I just don't see a need to break the bank on hardware. Now, obviously, if you're using proprietary platform and proprietary software that has a much higher system resource need, you're going to have to consider that, and you're going to probably invest in a gaming computer with much higher specs than what I'm doing. But used, refurbished, I think better than used. Refurbished is better than used because you're going to get new components with refurbished. You'll get usually with refurbished, they replace almost everything but the processor and the main hardware, like the screen, with an all-in-one. You're going to get the shell and everything there, but they're going to replace the RAM and they're going to replace the hard disk. Everything else will be original and cleaned up. But I highly recommend looking into refurb. Just like buying a used car. I mean, most people buy used cars rather than buying new. It's a more economical investment if you buy a recently used car, especially if you get one that's certified used by the dealership, right? That's the idea. Buy refurb from a reputable vendor, and you'll have the customer service there, and you'll get something that's as good as new. Highly recommend that route for hardware. So that's it. That's all I got. That's what I use. Techniques. Obviously, I'm using headphones a lot. I do have that very basic stereo playback system for monitoring. My car, I have different vehicles, a couple different vehicles. I'll play stuff back in the car on my way to work, or on the road. Earbuds. I have, regular standard cheap earbuds, but then I've got nice Bose Bluetooth. I'll play my stuff on whatever I'm listening to, wherever I'm listening to it. And I just want to try to mix so that it sounds good on everything. If you can mix so it sounds good on everything, then you've achieved what you need to do. And I think doing that is far more beneficial than mixing on very high-end monitor speakers and then leaving everything to chance. So, yeah, that's my philosophy on that. Headphones are more than sufficient. They really are for most things. So that's it. That's my hardware. That's what I use. And if you're on Linux, you probably do very much a similar kind of thing. And if you're on proprietary platforms, I recommend investigating some of these strategies to save a little bit on your budget for your hardware. The music matters more than the hardware. And I have to end this with, I probably should have started with this, is you don't need anything, really. I mean, I once heard a electronic music expert mention, really, for electronic music, really what you need is a tape recorder and another tape recorder and a microphone, and you can do electronic music, and then sound sources. And they don't have to be any particular synthesizer, just things that make noise. And you can do electronic music, the ability to record and then re-record and dub and go back and forth. That's what you need at the least. And then you go up from there. You just add components on top of that to get to the type of music that you want to achieve. But you can do professional work with hardly anything at all if it's the right style and the right application. So, just keep that in mind. There's no requirements for professional quality. There is whatever you need to get what you need. And that is what you need. It's pretty simple. So anyway, good luck with that. Happy composing, happy mixing.